Welcome, everyone. This is the second in the series of meetings to review new worker proposals. Today, I'm going to be presenting a core infrastructure worker proposal. So let's get started. So previously, I owned 7 different worker proposals, which kind of probably the biggest one was the dashboard. But there was a bunch of kind of smaller ones. So this time around, I felt it would be beneficial to try to actually combine them into a single worker proposal as opposed to have them separate, because I think that actually gives us an opportunity to leverage some of the efficiencies of kind of people being able to shift between one area or the other, depending kind of what's needed. And it's kind of similar concept I was advocating yesterday when we were talking about Wayne's worker proposal. I think there's some, as you scale down and the teams get smaller, I think you can get some efficiencies if a single team is kind of responsible for more than one thing. So here's what I'm proposing. So that's a high level kind of 5 different areas. And you can see the existing worker proposals that are partially covered by it. So core chain, I think everybody knows by now that Eric's will be leaving. So I'm proposing to take over some, not all, and we'll talk about that in a second, responsibilities that he has. So that's basically the existing worker proposal for the chain. I don't know why I don't have your core, Eric, in here. I should be in here.
That is the core. 49 is core.
Oh, 49 is core. Okay, got it. Yeah, I do have it. Okay, never mind. Okay, so yeah, that's one area, and I'll talk in details for each one of those areas as to what it covers and what it doesn't. The other is critical services. So we've actually accumulated quite a few services. I think there's like a dozen of them right now that we're operating for a variety of reasons, and think that it's beneficial to continue to operating them. So I kind of bundled them together and said, okay, we're going to operate all those services. Some are currently covered under Eric's worker proposals. Some are the Explorer, for example, bundled in here. Grafana reporting side, which had a separate worker proposals. It's all kind of bundled in here. And then continue to operate the dashboard, which is kind of what I've been focusing on mostly up until now anyway. I'm proposing to take on the FIO website, which is currently owned by the Promote FIO worker proposal. And that's just really primarily to build out the website. We've been working with GP on the dashboard and actually building a lot of the informative and marketing content there. And we feel like, that's kind of working well and is efficient. So I think we can kind of bring that to the website and build it out and complete the migration from the knowledge base, which I know we've been trying to do for a long time. And this is one of the examples where we can kind of like share the resources. GP's historically only been working on the dashboard, but that's a perfect area where I think he can help and we can gain some efficiencies there. And the 5th area is the DAO. So just operating some of the infrastructure that is required for the DAO to operate. Obviously, I had 2 worker proposals in that area. One was the enable FIO contributors collaboration, which is primarily operating the kind of the Atlassian stack and facilitating some discussions regarding process governance and things like that. And then steering committee is primarily just organizing the meetings and paying the board members, and also taking some of the responsibilities that currently fall under CFO support, which is headed by David. So here's core chain. Maybe it's I don't necessarily want to go and read through every single bullet here, but I try to maybe cover it at a high level and then focus on there's kind of like what's included and what's excluded. So I think that should kind of probably talking about the excluded is a better way, because it's like, hey, we all know that Eric does a lot of things related to the chain, but let me just quickly highlight this. Obviously, maintaining the open source code, supporting the ongoing maintenance of the contracts, fixing bugs on the chain and kind of focusing on the stability and performance of the chain. That's kind of like the core responsibility, I think, rather than new FIP development. I'll talk about that in a second. Doing QA, overseeing all of the internal tools like DevNet, TestNet, kind of coordinating with the block producer and building and maintaining the chain and the releases. Includes development and maintenance of the DevHub, which is a support tool for integrators, Fios SDKs, and also the wrapping Oracle, which obviously is a decentralized Oracle. There are 3 VPs that are running it, and if it's running, that's great. But if something goes wrong, then somebody needs to be there to help fix that. Maintain the Ledger app, and really offering limited ticket-based technical support for integrators. And if you switch over to the excluded, I think that's kind of where maybe it will make more sense. This will not really include any new FIP development. And when I say any, that's maybe like too strict. There might be some new FIPs that we do include, but those will typically be kind of focused on improving things that might be broken today, or kind of implementing some easy fixes, like, for example, what if we were to extend the characters that are allowed in a Fiat crypto handle? Currently, it's only a dash, right? But there's been some talk about, hey, wouldn't it be beneficial if there are more characters? Maybe things like that, but definitely no big FIP development. Those that will have to be pitched to the steering committee separately. So if there is a need or somebody wants to do it, then they would have to figure out what the resources are and then basically pitch that to the steering committee for that development. Feature level performance testing, there's a lot of work that Eric's done in that area, and as part of the consolidation, we probably are not going to be, we're going to be doing some of that, but very limited. Contract and chain audits are kind of off the table. I think where we are today, we've kind of feel good that the audits we've completed are sufficient. In the future, if they're needed, that perhaps they'd be pitched as a separate worker proposal. Large upgrades to accommodate changes to the EOSIO code base, and this is a little hard to determine exactly what that means, but generally there are some upgrades. We want to continue to upgrade the FIO chain as part of this worker proposal, but obviously we have to recognize that we're scaling down the resources, and it may not always be feasible to do with the existing resources. So it'll be kind of decided on a case-by-case basis whether we can accommodate an upgrade with the existing resources or not. And if it's not, the answer is not, but we still feel it's needed, then we might come to the steering committee and say, hey, here's the amount of work and the resources that would be needed to complete a large upgrade of the chain. Performance and scalability improvements to accommodate a large influx of transactions that impact state. So I think that we will cover the performance analysis and kind of recommendations for what the chain should do in order to accommodate future transactions, but it is likely going to need to lead to heavy development, right? And if that's the case, for example, there's been discussions about taking some stuff off state and putting it in an off-chain database, right? That's massive development. If that's something that the team feels is important for us to do to accommodate future traffic, then we'll basically bring this to the steering committee and say, hey, here's where we are, here's the analysis we've done, here's the risk, here's the cost, and the steering committee can make a decision, whether it's worth funding or not. Support for new wallet that can be used by any exchanges and other integrators to hold FIO keys. This is specifically the Binance wallet issue. Well, it's not Binance wallet, it's the KioSD wallet, but Binance is using it, and they've actually run into some issues with performance in the past. They kind of found a workaround to that. So chances are that that's not going to be an issue, but I just wanted to call it out that we will not be focusing on building a kind of industry grade exchange wallet that allows them to host a lot of keys. Let's see what else. Develop and maintain tools and services that support integrations. And generally, the next one is work with integrators to facilitate setting up and running FIO nodes and support integration partners with code review and code samples. Bottom line, those three items I think are covering a lot of hands-on support that we've been offering to our partners and actually spending a lot of our time. I think some of that is going to be taken over by Wayne's worker proposal. So that's basically what it is. I mean, what this worker proposal will cover is basically just maintaining the official docs, whatever it's the SDK or the DevHub API spec, and saying, here's how you interact with the chain, and limited support if somebody has some issues through a ticket-based support. But we will not be able to sit on 2-hour calls with a partner to help them, handhold them to help them figure out how to integrate FIO. Block producer audits. This was something that we didn't necessarily do a lot of, but it was on Eric's list. So I wanted to acknowledge that that's not necessarily something we will be doing. ERC 20 and ERC 721 contracts. So obviously we've done those for the wrapping project, right? So we've done the WFIO contract and the FIO domain contract. They were done and deployed in such a way that they are really not upgradable, right? So we basically discarded the key, and that was for security reason. But there is a chance that something could go catastrophically wrong that would potentially require us to redeploy a new contract and migrate the stuff to from the old contract to the new one. We don't anticipate that, but if that were to ever happen, then that would likely be contracted in separate development. And strategic consulting for other projects, I think that kind of falls into that partner. And after our support, I think, and you'll actually see that throughout this review, that I don't think we necessarily ever formalize what is our responsibility for after our support. But given the scale down and the reduction of cost, you're basically going to see this theme throughout every area here, is where we're basically acknowledging that we're not offering after hours support. Now, that doesn't mean that, if something breaks on the weekend, I will totally not do anything. Of course, we will try to help as much as possible, but we're not going to guarantee response time, whatever that's chain or the dashboard or the website. That any work will be done, it will be based on availability of people after hours. So that's the core chain. Let's see, the next one is core services. So this is the list of services I was referring to that we currently operate, and will likely continue to operate them because each one serves a purpose that I believe is valuable. But again, no major enhancements to those services other than kind of maintenance and bug fixes, and no after-hours support. Dashboard, that's basically what I have been doing, operating the dashboard side, merchant services, which is ability to pay through Stripe and BitPay. That requires a separate relationship because the foundation cannot get those merchant agreements set up because it's a Cayman entity, be very hard to do. Develop and launch bug fixes and limited functionality enhancements. So so if you look, when we get to the budget, you will see that I'm basically proposing to maintain the same budget for the third-party developer, which is Aleph One, which is $20,000 a month. But this again, in the spirit of kind of sharing responsibilities across different areas, it's likely that I may be tapping into that budget to cover things outside of the dashboard. So not all of the money might be going to the dashboard, and as a result, there might be some reduction in our throughput on building things on the dashboard side. And limited ticket-based technical support for end users, which is something we do right now. What it will exclude is marketing any major, revamps of the website functionality and after-hours support. So on the marketing side, I think this is part of what we covered yesterday, that whatever we should be doing marketing or not. My take on this is that everything we have tried so far is significantly underwater for return on ad spend. We cannot even get close to actually running a return on ad spend positive campaigns with everything we try. Now, that doesn't mean it's not possible, but I would suggest, and that's what I'm proposing here, is that we basically stop doing specific media buys for the dashboard project, and in turn, kind of defer to whatever is the best strategy for acquiring users and transactions and revenue, which is led by or would be led if approved by Wayne, Wayne's worker proposal, and just kind of trying to identify, given the budget we want to spend, what is the most efficient way to drive new transactions and revenue. But this worker proposal by itself would not actually spend any money on marketing. It would just run the product and optimize the product, but it would rely on the existing, on the other worker proposal for any kind of traffic and revenue. So that's, I think, an important distinction and was different from what we're doing today. FIO website, operate the core website and the knowledge base until it's migrated to core site, and bugs and fixes and adding new content as it becomes relevant or needed, and excludes, again, any marketing. I think that kind of applies to the website as well as the dashboard, and no major enhancements, no end user support, and after hours support. I think that if I'm not mistaken, Wayne, you can correct me, is your worker proposal does include kind of running the social channels, is kind of how we offer end user support already through Discord. Is that correct, Wayne?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's yeah, I mean, we're not including the website because you were taking that, but you're right, all the support happens in Discord.
And the DAO stack. So here's kind of included, excluded. I've David, for you, based on your request, I kind of highlighted the items that specifically fall into your worker proposal with the CFO tag here. So what's included is operating the Jira Confluence contributor stack, coordinate governance process changes, which is kind of what I've already been doing. Those 2 items, 3 items, foundation emails to active workers is part of this as well. Steering committee coordination, FIO board coordination. I guess that's the part I would be covering from the CFO worker proposal, and then producing monthly financial reports on treasury, actual spend, budget forecast, income, all of that, which falls under your worker proposal. What is not included under my worker proposal is worker proposal payments, which is included in the treasurer worker proposal that I'll be reviewing tomorrow. Market making relationship, BD support, which I think is kind of primarily like consulting on deal structures and potentially legal advice, right, David?
Yep.
So I would assume, I didn't put it in here because I wasn't sure, but I would assume that that'd be taken over by Wayne. Binance specifically, I would also assume that'd be kind of taken over by Wayne, since this is a partner relationship at the end of the day. Cayman and BVI entities, which is kind of primarily payment from what I gathered. So obviously, that I think would be taken over by the treasurer worker proposal. As changed listings,
Yeah, to be
yeah.
clear, it's not just payments. I mean, for example, they just sent another questionnaire to us, so we'd like it to be just payments, but there's questionnaires that come up. There's new BVI regulation now that we have to deal with the board and decide what to do. So it's that kind of stuff as well.
So I would think it's probably something that will fall between me and Luke. So between the treasurer and in this worker proposal, and obviously probably involving the board. So I'm fine just kind of leaving it kind of open and being responsive, both of us. Exchange listings, which I don't think we do a lot of anymore. I would think that kind of falls under BD. And treasury management, that definitely falls under the treasurer worker proposal, and of course, no after-hour support. So let's see, that's basically it for what it includes. Now, quickly KPIs, they're significantly scaled down. I mean, if you look at all the KPIs that I've been tracking combined with all the KPIs that Eric's been tracking, and it's just a lot. And I don't think it's really necessary for where we are. So the strategic objectives is provide critical function to the FIO blockchain ecosystem sustainability. Obviously, this worker proposal is primarily focused on running things, right? Making sure that things operate, website operate, that we're not dark and and not present. And then obviously within that, continuing to make things better and fix things that are broken. And also increase efficiency of worker proposals, because again, by scaling it down, we're actually reducing the budget from what it is today. On the core chain KPIs, I propose 4: bug report to mainnet, release time, trailing 12-month count of major minor releases, chain incident rate if there's any kind of major disruption to the chain, and average time to wrap FIO tokens and domains, which kind of covers the wrapping portion. On the critical services, I think that should be only uptime. On the dashboard, I actually added net profit in here, but then I actually decided I probably shouldn't have that, because I think all of the transaction profit, I think should be moved to the worker proposal that's actually driving the traffic, which would be Wayne. So I wouldn't necessarily report any of the activities on the dashboard as profit. I think that should be reported as profit on Wayne's worker proposal. So actually, I wanted to take this one out and I forgot. So I don't think that profit should be in here. UV to buy conversion and uptime is kind of what I think we should be tracking, kind of focusing on. And on the website, uptime, and on the DAO, contributor satisfaction, which is primarily the survey we do I've only done once, but should probably be doing every couple of months or every quarter. And time to post financial reports, kind of added in here because it was there on yours, David, but my goal is to actually automate all those reports, so they are going to be in real time, so it'd be kind of a relevant KPI. And contributor website uptime. So as you can see, significantly scaled down in terms of KPIs. Well, let me cover the team. So this is the team. Obviously, probably know most everybody here. Myself, GP, Ed, and Mike on the tech side. We all have obviously a lot of experience doing what we're doing, including specific experience on the FIO project. And the budget, here's the budget. I'm not gonna go through it line by line, but you can see it's people and outsource development and operations, hosting, tools, and a little bit of a buffer, and steering committee compensation, and annual FIO domain renewals. I kind of rolled that in because I think that's important to be tracking. That's the dashboard team, I think, currently owns a bunch of domains that will likely continue to own and need to renew. So I kind of added in here. So it's a little under $100,000 budget, which if you look at where we are today, where it's about 147,000, so it's about a third, 32% reduction from where we are today. And that's it.
So if I understand what you presented correctly, tell me if this is a fair characterization or not. I mean, it's the proposal essentially is talking about maintaining what it is existing, and not doing any sort of enhancements to obviously the chain or to the dashboard. So no enhancements, no improvements, just maintaining what is there. Is that a fair characterization?
And not, I would say no major enhancements. I think there would definitely, we're definitely going to keep developing the dashboard, right? So if you look at the cadence of what is being rolled out on the dashboard, it will likely continue, maybe at a smaller rate, because again, we're like likely take some of that development and kind of share it with some of the other projects. But I will likely continue, and I think we look at. I think you recently look at it, what we've done in the last 6 months, and that was basically with this budget. So I'd expect something similar to continue. But again, we might also, for example, instead of dashboard, also see the website continue to improve, right, and add new content and potentially new features on the chain as well. I would actually expect that there will be releases, right? So it's not like we're just going to sit there and do nothing, but there definitely will be releases. There'll be some bug fixes. For example, we will have a roadmap of items that we want to tackle on the chain side. It may sometimes just involve analysis, right? Say, okay, well, let's analyze what it will take to improve performance, and then see what is the result of that. If the result of that is something we can do easily, then let's do it. But if the result of this is a multi-month, multi-people person project, then we can't do that. We will have to pitch that to the steering committee separately. Upgrades, for example, we are debating still whether the Antelope upgrade should be done as part of what we're proposing here or not. We don't have the answer on that yet, because we kind of have to look a little closer at the scope and kind of what else we're doing and whatever we can pull it off as well. But it's possible, right? So no, I wouldn't say it's just maintaining. It's just it will definitely include, I would say, continuous improvement, but no major initiatives.
So were there any KPIs related to, actually enhancing and improving the chain or the dashboard? I mean, because what I saw on the earlier side seemed to say no improvements, what was excluded. In the excluded section, it seemed like it was excluding all improvements, the way I heard it and read it.
Well, no, it's primarily, so if we go back to the chain, it says, large, like new FIP development. Again, I kind of, yeah.
How do you have a chain enhancement without a FIP?
So maybe I should modify this to say no major FIP development.
Or like
That's
feature.
kind of what I mean.
I
Yeah.
kind of actually agree with that. That there would be no FIP development. Like, does it necessarily need to come from the core team? Like, it should be FIP development should be coming from the community. I think that was, that was a large point of why I did not submit a competing proposal. I actually expected something different that kind of depended a little more on community support. So moving development and community driven was supposed to be an opportunity for developers, was not supposed to be an opportunity for some developers to increase their salaries. Since, there's been a KPI system that was introduced, and development decisions by the steering committee have leaned largely in favor of quantity instead of quality, in favor of metric reporting. And now the pay actually seems to increase in areas where KPIs were reduced. So I can't overlook that part. And the other one is, there is kind of a difference between like this proposal and the last one we just saw. This has a proposal of 4 people for $55,000 a month. The other proposal supports 14 people for $62,000 a month. I just don't see, no matter how many roles you put on here or what the actual contributions are, I don't see how 4 people on Pavel's proposal with 1 person doing multiple roles can contribute to greater growth at a significant rate broader than the 14 people who are filling multiple roles on the other proposal. So something's a little off with the budgeting, I think.
Okay.
Just from a macro point of view, I'm not looking at the details. This is very macro, right? I just want to kind of give that overlook. And I will have to say some of the excluded items in the proposal have already been enacted via the steering committee for a few months anyway, right? So I don't really see the work as a savings. And some of this 32% reduction in cost, I believe 10% of that is actually just me leaving Dev, and the rest of it is just Eric. So I don't actually see I see cuts in the proposal, but I don't see anyone here making the same sacrifices on this proposal as the other 14 people on the other proposal. So something's a little lopsided here. I just wanted to be honest and
No, thank you for your feedback, Adam. You're right. There is no reduction. In fact, actually, every single person that you see on this list is actually going to be making more money versus what they are making today. And that's a result of just taking more responsibilities and overall and more risk and more to manage. So that is correct. That's how it is. That's exactly what I'm proposing. Obviously, it's up to the steering committee to decide if that's acceptable or not.
Okay, I get it. It just seems like, some areas of software development, if the KPIs are being reduced, how are the salaries going up? Right? If we're not being so critical on KPI reporting on core chain development, where's the improvement? Like, I don't see the area.
There's not necessarily an improvement, I don't think. We can't deny that Eric's leaving the team leaves a gargantuan astronomical gap on the core team. The number of items and roles which he fulfilled is multitudinous, and both Pavo and I and Mike, we are all going to be expanding what we do on a daily basis as far as our roles, responsibilities, duties, and interactions in order to fill part of that gap. So what you see is a net decrease in service from the core team with key staff members missing that were taking on multi-dimensional roles. So every person that remains is stepping up enormously out of areas in which they have passion and competency and filling gaps. It's very startup-y. So it becomes like that.
Okay, no, I get it. The money's there, right? The problem is it's not in other areas, and it's going to seem very unfair to the other 14 people in that proposal. I tell you right now, they're all making sacrifices. And you guys, I'm telling you right now, Ed,
I don't know that
Ed, I would definitely live up to your word. I recall a phone call last month stating that if you had to, you would take the cut along with everyone else. So I'm glad
that is the
conversation coming out in favor.
Yeah,
but I'm still going to be taking up a lot of tasks that Eric's leaving behind that are not covered in this proposal system, and another integration proposal in another area that isn't going to encompass a lot of this early on, right? So
yeah, I think
a lot of that savings isn't going over to that proposal, right?
When I have this style of conversation, I don't want to go into what I'm sacrificing with incentives on the project, with base salary. I don't feel that that's the productive conversation that we can be having. The sacrifices that are being made by every person that remains on the worker proposal are enormous. And I don't know that that's a productive conversation to have.
I think.
Let me finish. Allow me to finish, please. So saying, can we do this job for even less money is a really valid question. And I think Pavo is prepared to address that question. So I hope that is helpful.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think I just want you guys to know it's going to seem a little unfair to some people. It's definitely seeming a little unfair to me because I made a lot of big sacrifices in order to move off the proposal and move towards community development. But I'm also not benefiting from this, and other people are, right? And some things are a little skewed right now. It's going to be tough to figure out. The other areas, like what you said, like what's being excluded here is there's no strategy for peer review of the FIO chain code. I think this is absolutely critical and should be planned out more thoroughly. Without peer review, nothing is getting onto the chain, no matter what you guys do, right? I mean, that's what you've eliminated without two core developers. You've eliminated peer review off of this, and I think it's, from a scientific point of view, it's probably like not really a big mistake. It's just like I think it's kind of a budgeting oversight. But Ed, this is a budgeting conversation. I'm sorry, but like the salaries are a part of it. Like mine are.
I agree. The question becomes, can Pavo do this? Give him a hallmark. Can he do it for half the money? I give him a challenge point. Comparing. When we talk about compensation, I don't find it really productive to compare the value of a resource versus the cost of a resource to, does this resource deserve as much as that resource? it's a whole ethical discussion that, we should take offline probably.
I'm not even having it as an ethical discussion. We measure these resources and KPIs, but I just noticed that a lot of the KPIs that were used towards the decision making were actually extremely quality or quantity FIPS over a lot of the quality work that some of the developers have been focused on the last several months. It don't actually show up in the same KPIs and this metric reporting that we're using. So it's just, I think things are a little more complex than we let them out to be. And the budgets, it still seems a little skewed. You understand that everyone that's on this card now, and a lot of people that aren't, people are, cutting a lot and they're putting more time in for a lot less. So the ethical discussion is actually, why should all these people be doing this when some core elements of the team don't seem to have to make any sacrifices, right? So FIO is at 3 cents right now. It's expected that everybody has to cut some fat along the way. I'm just stating that in reality, with everything we got on, it actually took a lot of brass to put any pay increases on any proposals. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't think I'm going to take up any more of you guys' time. Thank you.
I don't think that it's a pay increase. There is a change of responsibilities and the volume of responsibilities. So that's all I can say. And
Okay,
Pablo,
let me
thank you for allowing me back,
let
Pablo.
me speak.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of questions that have been asked by a few people. So let me I've been taking notes. Let me try to go back and answer some of those questions. So from the KPI standpoint question, the KPIs that David, you've asked about kind of new development. So for example, on the dashboard, the primary KPI would be UV to buy conversion, right? Which is basically continue to enhance the website, which should be expressed in the UV to buy conversion going up, right? Since we are not proposing any marketing budget here, it will be, I can't control the input, right? So I can control the users that are coming into the site, but what I can control is to some extent, because actually UV to buy conversion is also dependent on the quality of the traffic that's coming to the site. But assuming that's equal, obviously working towards improving the UV to buy conversion, which we will be working on, as we have been for the past few months. On the chain, the primary KPI is just to really make sure it runs, right? That's the KPI. There's not going to be major enhancements. There will be enhancements, but they will be based on our ability of two developers to develop them. Code reviews, us in terms of, I don't know if that was specifically called out or not in here, but the team is going to continue to be responsible for releases of the chain, which includes potentially code contributors from outside of this team, right? So if somebody out there in the community proposes and develops new functionality, this team will be responsible for integrating that functionality into the core software chain, right? So obviously there'll be some code reviews that will be required for that. Now, I don't know exactly how much that would involve, but we can't deploy somebody else's code if we don't understand what it does, right? So that's definitely included. In terms of the compensation, I'm not going to be discussing what others are doing. I can only be discussing on what I'm comfortable proposing. And I've discussed this with the team that I'm putting together and kind of the responsibilities that we're taking on. And that's basically what we're proposing. It's up to the community, or more specifically to the steering committee, to decide if that's adequate or acceptable, or whatever other attributes you want to apply to it.
Yeah. Pablo, can I chime in for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess my biggest thing, Adam brings up some valid points. I don't disagree. That everybody's doing more here in your proposal as well, as far as what they're currently doing. And there was a lot of the same spirit yesterday on the same call. So that's where a lot of the comparisons are. And yet we're sacrificing, we're cutting And one thing that happened on the last budget discussion, I just want to bring up, I think needs to be talked about, is $21,000 of your proposed cut right now is you're taking dashboard marketing from 21,000 to 0. That's a huge cut. I feel some of that budget should be spent, which is why I allocated in my initial calculations of, because that was under marketing. And then on the last budget discussion, it was moved under you, and rightfully so. You did a great job managing and really exposing some vulnerabilities and flaws there. And I think money should still be spent there, because we don't just abandon the funnel. We've got to optimize the funnel and figure out what works here. And we've got strategies around that I'm going to propose. So 21,000 of this reduction that you're taking is not from consolidating team or team. It's just from saying that marketing budget in effect is going from 21,000 to 0. So I think we should look at it a little more balanced approach as what's being spent on what. I know is under your work proposal. You have every right to include it. I just feel that we should be looking at that, because in that essence, that really gets us both to around a 25% cut, which obviously some people in the steering committee feel there should be more. I think we need some time to develop new strategies. We know what we've had happening in the past, and you, Pavo, and GP and the team, and also us, we've got a lot of great strategies and ideas that we just need a chance to try out. And if we don't get to there, then, then we could look at deeper cuts. But I think we've got to give new strategy a try, because I think cutting too deep on any side, your side or the growth side, or any of the other proposals right now, it's not just going to be extending runway. If we cut it too deep, that runway is going to experience like accelerated decay. It won't just be on paper right now. It may look like 35 months or 40 months, but it's going to decay rapidly if it looks like there's nothing happening from the team. So I would just, and I'm not saying anything about yours. We can debate the line items. Adam brought up some good points. Ed brought up some good points. You did as well. But I think we should look at the total spend and evaluate what that number is, instead of, I've got a proposal that I think can be very effective, but I've got to go back and strategize and figure out how to cut to meet the steering committee's recommendations, when, as I'm laying out what the strategy is going to be and that I'm going to propose here on my next part of proposal. I really think we should give it a shot where we're at. We're not too far off. You look at David's calculations. If everyone that's proposed right now gets approved, it's a 23% cut. Obviously, we can tweak that to 25. I just think we should do like we did last time. Let's give some new strategies a try. And if we revisit this thing, 4 or 5 months, 6 months from now, and it's not working, then we can cut deeper. So that's just my, my input on all that.
I totally agree that we should be looking at, I said that yesterday as well, we should be looking at the overall spend. That's what matters, right? It doesn't matter what's in the individual worker proposal. What matters is that at the end of the day, we are reducing our budget combined, at a as aggressive level as possible. Absolutely 100% agree. I can obviously only speak to what I'm willing to propose, right? And unfortunately, it is probably true. And I think, Luke, you've mentioned this many times before. Unfortunately, there aren't many alternatives out there for the steering committee to pick from, and that's definitely part of our issues, right? I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and kind of what it would take for me to take on core chain. That's not my favorite thing to do. The primary reason I'm doing it is because it feels like, there aren't really a lot of other options. And honestly, when it comes to the chain, I personally don't feel comfortable taking it on at a lower rate than is proposed here. So what I could do is not include the chain at all, right? Which if I did that, that would be a reduction of, let's see, 10, probably be 2 from here, 10, that's 12, 17, 29 plus 8.5. That would be what, 29, 37.5 roughly is kind of the cost of the chain if you wanted to look at it that way. But then obviously we would still have to find someone to potentially pitch the chain portion of the worker proposal. So that's one potential for me to reduce this budget, but obviously it reduces it by not taking on chain. The other way to potentially reduce this budget is to lower the outsourced development, which is currently at 20,000. I see we could potentially bring this down. So maybe save maybe 10,000 here, but that would obviously reduce, like if I brought outsourced development by 50% down, I would probably also have to reduce GP's time because we wouldn't have as much capacity. So that could be savings of maybe 15-ish kind of, I don't know, I have to think about that. But the downside is that the velocity of development will probably drop by like 50% of what we are able to release in terms of enhancements to the website. So those are probably the only kind of alternatives to what I'm proposing here that I'm personally willing to accept. And I do recognize that there, you know, different people can do different work at different rates, right? That's just how the world works. I'm not saying that somebody couldn't pitch this for a lower rate. They probably could, right? But it's ultimately would have to, first of all, we would have to find these people, and then the steering committee would have to decide if that's acceptable or not.
If I could go, I got a couple of thoughts here. One, I appreciate your comments, Adam. I think they are important. I'd recommend, just for me personally, it's helpful to not frame it necessarily in fairness, because fairness is a kind of a loaded word. It's not one of our strategic goals. We're not trying to create a fair environment. But we do want to create an environment that understands, in my perspective, a better framing might be the game theory dynamics we have here. We're always going to be dealing with trade-offs, and we're going to be dealing with basically, you know, the prisoner's dilemma of like Pablo or anyone can say, look, no one else is willing to do this. It has to be done. So I essentially can ask whatever I want, and you can take it or leave it. And this is a constant dynamic that we're going to be dealing with when we talk about salaries and talk about what people are willing to do. And you know, and that's just the pain threshold that we're all willing to admit. And at some point, you know, we say no, and stuff falls through the cracks, and we scramble to try to find somebody to do it, and maybe they'll do it better or not, for less or not. And that's the dynamics we have to deal with. And really, the best way to deal with that is to do, I think, exactly what Adam did, just express our frustrations if it gets to that point, saying, hey, look, other people are willing to sacrifice more in the prisoner's dilemma concept of the game theory in the hopes that long-term we're all going to win out. Whereas if other people aren't willing to sacrifice from a perceptional perspective, and I agree with what Ed said, is that there's more responsibilities. So you could argue in some framework, if you're working, you know, 60, 70 hours when you used to be working 40 hours as an example, then you're not necessarily making a per hour, you know, increase, even if the money that you're being paid is going up, right? So there's a lot of ways to look at this. The way I'm going to look at this is if we spend close to $1.2 million on this over the next 12 months, and not much of it has to do with increased revenue, frankly, how are we going to know that we are a more sustainable organization 12 months from now? That's a question I can't answer. I mean, the only metric out of all of this that even slightly points to that is improving the conversion rate. But if we're not driving, you know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of users to our website, then that doesn't matter. We could have 100% conversion rate out of, you know, 50 people, and that doesn't matter. So I'm a bit concerned back to the overall budget discussion. The amount of money that we feel is like necessary to make this all happen is a lot. And I'm just going, okay, great. We could do this for 2 or 3 years and then not do it anymore. So what does that look like? What does it look like to not do these things? And how will the protocol kind of live on its own? And I think it would, to a degree, as long as you've got block producers, but obviously not nearly at the same level of capacity or capability that we currently have. So my concern is just not much of this is really focused on revenue. Secondly, it's the idea that by not doing marketing, and I guess I want to hear from Wayne on this, how willing are you to change everything if the marketing is telling you what you're doing isn't going to work for us? Meaning if the website has to be completely retooled to do a conversion funnel or some product-based marketing approach or some other something, I'm just curious, how open are you to changing the dashboard, changing the website based on feedback from marketing? Because something I've heard in the past is that, you know, campaigns were started and they were shut down because, you know, the conversion stuff or the flow or whatever wasn't right, and we had to make some changes. Now I feel like you've been responsive, Pablo, so far, but that's just something I want to touch on a bit more because I feel like there's a lot of tight integration, and the way this is structured, you kind of are off the hook for actually creating revenue. It's just like, well, that's marketing's fault. They have to figure it out. And so then you could get to the situation where there's again some unhealthy game dynamics. And then the last point I want to make that I think is kind of an overarching concern for the whole approach is that, and I've said this many times before, the number one threat to a DAO, as I understand it, is apathy. And that relates to just not having people that care enough to do the work. And that shuts everything down. And I want to keep that in mind when we start thinking about, you know, what we might call fairness or the game theory dynamics of some people taking larger cuts than others, is that if you just have enough apathy where people don't care to even show up and be willing to put in the work, regardless of what it's going to cost the DAO, then that really causes problems. I've lived through that. I've seen it in a lot of different DAOs. So that's part of the game theory dynamic we have to balance. It's like, okay, the alternative is, for example, Pavo doesn't submit anything and all these things just don't get done anymore. What's the pain point threshold we're willing to take with that threat of apathy? These are the very real concerns I see it. So again, to summarize, I'm concerned about the amount of money, $1.2 million with no real direct relationship to revenue, as I understand it, other than risk mitigation, meaning like if these things stopped and things that might have made us revenue just, can't now because the chain isn't working or some major website's down or whatever. And then two, just the integration points with marketing to make sure we can actually drive eyeballs to this and how important that is and the flexibility to adjust. And then of course, the apathy and the concerns about the prisoner's dilemma dynamic of the game theory of, how much pain are we willing to accept collectively and how much pain are we going to accept individually? And we have to feel like we're all on the same team here. And if that isn't happening, you're going to get the same dynamics you get with the prisoner's dilemma.
Thanks, Luke.
I have a thought as well, if that's Pavo.
Yes, I was
And
just
then I have
about to
some-
call on you.
Yeah, and then I just have some kind of details on the proposal as well that I just want to clear up. But yeah, this is a follow-up to Luke, and it is a lens on how you view scaling down, which is what we're doing, right? And I've talked about this in the past as over the last year, Ed and I and the dev team has spent endless hours kind of talking about what does a working team look like, right? And with you as well, Pablo. And we've scaled down last March, kind of almost quarterly, kind of hacking away at it. And I don't think that's a bad approach. I actually don't agree with as early as possible cut to the bone, because I think every time you cut, you increase risk, right? Risk that about apathy. I agree with that, Luke, but also just you could decimate the team and not know what's going to happen. So I'm more prone to do kind of incremental downsizing as needed, even if it doesn't extend the runway as much, because it reduces the risk. I think you could make kind of seriously bad decisions, both on marketing, BD, and on core as well. So my lens on this is, here is a proposal that was worked on to say, like, we can't afford a VP of engineering, doing everything, but someone has to take that on. And what does it look like? And how do we do that with the least amount of pain? The goal is not to maximize pain, it's to minimize pain as much as possible as well, and keep the team together and keep things on the tracks. You got to keep these trains on the tracks. But I wouldn't and we have also talked about, what does this look like as a DAO development team? Like, if we really, the lights on, Luke, cut this down and said, this is kind of the stuff Adam's talking about. If this is just put out to the community, what does that look like? We have not dismissed that. I just believe that going to that right now wouldn't be in the best interest of Theo. People may disagree. So, but reviewing this quarterly, like you said, Luke, yes, if in 6 months, nothing's really getting done and nothing's moving the needle, we've got to reevaluate that again. And I would just kind of encourage that type of reevaluation. And this team's good at that. We have never set things in stone and said this is going to run forever, right? In fact, we've had so many discussions on it gets a little tiresome to the point where, but I think it's healthy. That's how you evolve. And we're in this really dynamic startup mode of testing and failing and testing and failing. And that's going to change the outlook and what this team looks like. So just a different lens to look at that.
I kind of want to second that, Eric, where my perception is, we're all trying to migrate to a truer version of the DAO. And what does that look like? Is a DAO a village that doesn't have central infrastructure, where the villagers just they have to rally, and there has to be momentum and traction and lack of apathy in order to get anything done at the village level? Or is a DAO a village that has like a center post that is set, and a centralized tent that is set, and they are committed? They get a little more food, they get this, they get that, but they take care of that tent, and they also try to think community. Is that what it is? We're all trying to figure what this is for FIO, and it's going to be iterative, and it's exciting.
So can I jump in? I'm going to start with a question. Over the last year, do we have data on, how many chain related sort of bugs and bug fixes had to be dealt with, and sort of the level of effort and time that was required associated with those over the past year approximately, or some time frame? Do we have any sort of data or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the KPIs we look at, right, every week. So I do have that. Yeah.
So can you give me a sense roughly of how much, human time from the team has been required to deal with just, bugs and sort of maintenance related things over the last, 12 months?
Off the top of my head, probably not a great estimate, but I can find that data. I'll have to go dig that data and kind of apply it to release management.
I'm just trying to get a ballpark, is it?
Again, those are bugs in the structure of very hands-on, a lot of, the full team. When you don't have that, those risks increase to have those bugs, right? So it's kind of not, you can't just judge the past. It's not a time series regression, right? Yeah.
I understand when you have a bug, especially if it's a critical bug.
How long does that take? Yes.
It's all hands on deck sort of thing, and you need to have the resources there to fix it. When you don't have bugs, it obviously bug fixes don't take any of your time, right? If there are none. So I understand it's a surgy sort of thing, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, what has been the level of bug related stuff. And then I would subdivide that. Was that bugs related to new functionality that we put out, or was it bugs related to old functionality? I mean, when you release something new, wrapping or whatever, it's not uncommon that you identify more bugs than in the old stuff. Because I'm just trying to get my head around how much time is going to be required, from the team to actually deal with maintenance stuff. And if this proposal is saying that it's not just maintenance, that it is going to be actually enhancing things, then, where I sit at $100,000 a month, I want to see a roadmap. I mean, what are we going to be working on, at least for the next quarter, right? I mean, a year out, we may not know, but what is the roadmap here? What's going to be produced by this team? There needs to be some real specific deliverables that are baked in to this kind of a budget. That is, if it's not just a maintenance budget, as I thought that I was hearing, then, that needs to be there. Then for me, I get my head around better the amount of spend here. Even though when I step back to the 100,000 foot level, I am clearly the outlier. I've been the outlier since the beginning. I don't believe we cut deep enough the first time, the second time, and we're not cutting deep enough this time. And if we would have cut deep enough the first time, we would not be having the same type of a conversation right now, because we'd have an extra probably year of runway. And I don't believe that, every 3 months going back and doing more cuts, that is a healthy way to run any organization, centralized or decentralized. I think it's a very unhealthy way to run an organization. And I none of us know what's going to happen in 3 months. The market obviously rebounded for a while previously, and now we're just, going the other direction, probably because of the Fed statements, things completely out of our control. So who knows where it'll be in 3 months? Could be better, could be the same, could be worse. So my view on this is, if this proposal includes enhancements, then there needs to be specificity, at least in the next 3 to 6 months, about what is going to be delivered here by this team. And if it doesn't include enhancements, then let's just call a spade and say that, as we look at this and rationalize 100,000 a month. And I do believe, just top level overall spend, that 25% is not sufficient. We are going to, barring the token, going up, well, even if the token does go up, but barring the crypto markets going up significantly, meaning our Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera, increases in value, the foundation's gonna have to start implementing a FIO liquidation program in about 4 months. That's around the corner. You can't wait until you're gonna run out of non-FIO to start that program. So you're talking about in a quarter, starting to implement a sales program by the foundation to liquidate FIO in order to make sure that you have USDC to pay through the full runway, because that runway on non-FIO is significantly shorter, and you can't just ignore that. You have to be able to sell the FIO to do it. So that is not where you want to be as a foundation, to be into forced sales of FIO tokens, and we will be there very, very soon. Even with the cuts that are proposed, we're going to be there in not too many months.
So to answer your question on the roadmap, I absolutely agree that, there needs to be a roadmap. I don't agree that it needs to be 6 months out roadmap. So I can only right now speak to the dashboard roadmap, and we always maintain one, and it's in Jira. You can see every single thing that's in queue and being developed, everything that is currently in design, everything that's waiting to start to be developed. We're kind of operating more of I would say about a month worth of roadmap. I've never been a big fan in that kind of an environment when you're trying to optimize for conversion to be, spending a lot of time planning what you do in 6 months, because you typically want to be more reactive to what you're actually seeing in terms of data. And that's how we have been operating. And on the dashboard side, I have all the data on the chain. There is a roadmap. We actually had a conversation with Eric. Obviously, I've not been as closely involved with that, since that's not been my area of focus, and still honestly isn't until I were to take this on full time. But there is a roadmap of kind of items that Eric has created that is out there on the wiki as well, in terms of what the maintenance teams want to be working on. My goal is to, once we get approved on this, is to actually start working on refining that roadmap as well. And that roadmap probably be a little longer than on the dashboard side, maybe about 3 months. In terms of what we want to tackle in terms of pipeline, and the same would be developed for the website. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a roadmap on the website right now. But again, I don't own it, so I can't speak to that. But I can tell you absolutely that once I own that, I would definitely maintain a roadmap for the website as well.
I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I mean, it doesn't 6 months out, who the hell knows what's going to be happening, especially with this kind of a foundation in terms of what we're going to be trying to get done. It means we can't do huge ass projects, right? But I would ask that the proposal should include, here's what we're planning for core chain for the next month. Here's what we're planning for dashboard for the next month. Here's what we're planning for website roughly for the next month. And then the commitment that on a monthly basis, there's going to be a rolling plan that's made, in the monthly updates. It's here what we accomplished, here's what we delivered, here's what's on the roadmap for the next, the next month. And so that
and you've attended my dashboard meeting, so you kind of seen what you would expect from me in the other areas, kind of something similar, right? I always talk about, here's obviously where we are on the KPIs, and here's kind of what we have accomplished from a development standpoint in the passing month, and here's what we're focusing on for the next month at a kind of higher level. If you want to have the more details, then obviously Jira has all every single little story that is being worked on. So I can certainly link to that, to the dashboard stuff in here. I can probably link to the roadmap that Eric's put together for the team, which is kind of going to be my starting point. But obviously, until kind of get in deeper, I don't know what that would be.
I would say there should be, if enhancements are part of this, which we're saying they are, that there should be a KPI specifically that says, dashboard, core chain, website enhancements as, developed on a monthly basis and reported against on a monthly basis. That is a KPI, right? Here's what we're
I disagree that a velocity of enhancements is a KPI. I think the result should be the KPI. So in dashboard example, the result is the UV to buy conversion, right? That's what we're trying to improve. So the enhancements should all be basically geared towards making that improvement and making the site up, making sure it runs, rather than saying, oh, look, we've done 27 things, because that makes no sense. That would incentivize me to do a lot of smaller things as opposed to, one bigger thing, which
If that was a KPI in isolation, I'd agree, but it's not going to be a KPI in isolation. And with Core Chain, some of the things that may be on the roadmap, it's going to be very challenging to measure the correlation to the more important KPIs in some cases. And yet what's being worked on may be deemed as very important by your team and by others, right? So, I mean, what would get me very uncomfortable is if we were saying, and we're saying we're not saying this, that we're spending $100,000 a month just to maintain everything. That's just really, to me, it'd be like, whoa. But we're not saying that. So I do think there needs to be a KPI that says there's going to be monthly, reporting on the rolling monthly plan, reporting on what was completed against it, and that the level of progress and completion against the plans is part of the KPIs and measurables for the team. It's not the only one. But, producing the enhancements is,
maybe it's just semantics. To me, it's not a KPI, it's just a reporting, which I absolutely agree we need to have. And I always been providing for my work proposals, and will definitely provide for this one in terms of here's what we accomplished, here's what we're working on. But I just don't see that as a quote unquote KPI. KPI to me is a number, right? Or something like that. So it's not a KPI, it's just you want to have adequate reporting. And I agree with that 100%.
Another thought that might be helpful, related to David's comments and my own comments as well, is would you be willing to put together, you kind of started to a little bit, but put together a lights on only proposal? Because I'm just, back of the envelope looking at, okay, let's say, software architect lead and outsource development and release management. So let's say it's like, 40 grand right there. If someone came to the steering committee today and said, hey, I got a $40,000 proposal to do some software development for you, we would clearly be like, well, why would we do this? What are we going to gain? How is this going to impact our revenue? How is this going to impact the chain? What are you going to give us for $40,000 a month? And, if that $40,000 just didn't get spent and we didn't do that, what would be the result? And would it be that bugs that are known and cause frustration for integration partners or users of VO just stick around and they don't ever get fixed, for example? And what are those bugs, and how likely are those bugs to impact our plans for revenue growth in the future? And just thinking about what would be the bare bones of just like keeping the lights on, what does that even look like? And is that reasonable? Is there someone else who can say, hey, look, I can manage a basic website with, some kind of KPI for, minor changes or something. And maybe there's, some group somewhere that can do that in India, or who knows what. Obviously someone needs to manage that. So there's always that cost as well. But I'm just trying to think through how to justify these costs when I don't see a direct line of sight to an increase in revenue in some way. And so I kind of feel like David does, like this feels like you're giving us well, we're going to keep the lights on and maybe do some small stuff. I'm like, okay, well, how valuable is the small stuff? Because it still seems like a hell of a lot of money. And so if there's a lights on only process that is still really expensive, back to the game theory, that might be our reality also. Meaning you, particularly Pablo, might be like, well, this is what I'm willing to do, and I'm not willing to do other, stuff or less. So like these are the challenges that the steering committee has to take seriously and think through. Okay, what is Pablo willing to do for what pay, and what does that look like? And what are we really getting for the money we're spending?
I think that one of the things that that is important is to make sure that we're all having a really similar conversation on this. I think one of the things that Eric and I have talked about is risk assessment. Risk assessment has been something that has been a focus of software development forever. It's a great way to look at why you're doing what you're doing. For example, we hired a security playbook creator. We created that security playbook. A publishing of that is the risks of what we are not doing in the areas of security. Eric, can you comment on this? I'm not great with the words in these settings.
I would say I do. It is risk, right? And it's what Luke is asking for, right? A little bit is what is being delivered? What's the risk of not delivering it? These are very hard things to do because there's a high likelihood that it would not be Pavo and Ed doing those. So you kind of have to hypothesize that, is this possible? Yes. And what are the possible risks in this hypothetical team that costs 10,000 and everything's just out in the community? So you can beat your head against that a lot, David and Luke. So I would kind of ask for parameters on this. Like, what are you talking
Yeah,
about?
there's other things too. Like we've even discussed, Eric, and we've talked. So it's like we've even discussed, the sacrifice, the sacrifices that humans make in honoring a level of commitment to a project through its hardest times. I'm willing to go to an hourly rate, and that hourly rate has inherent risk because it's going to be the hourly rate. And if you need me more, you're going to have a big bill. It's like, so, when we talk about passion, when we talk about these things, people have all kinds of different value structures as to what they need in life. And Luke is great at talking about this. So
Well, what I would say to your point, Luke, is I absolutely agree that if the steering committee, and I'm putting my steering committee hat on, if the steering committee would have other proposals that offer an alternative, right? That's scaling things down and kind of being more of a lights on approach, that would be valuable and should be considered by the steering committee. I'm probably not the one that wants to submit such a worker proposal, but if there are others out there that want to do that, again, from a steering committee standpoint, I absolutely think that they should do it. And as a steering committee, we should evaluate that.
And when we talk about lights on, this gets mentioned often. What are the parameters? What does it mean to be lights on? Because Eric, one of the things I was hoping you bring up is, like, to me, this proposal is lights on. Eric, can you comment on that further, just from your own point of view?
Well, I mean, this is what we came to. I do agree, Ed, that this is what we came to maintain a chain. Like, if you can't do releases, if you can't get fixes out there, and you can't, those are all very, very time consuming things. You can't take risks and say, well, we're not going to QA. We will just have kind of, we'll bounty out bug fixes and bounty out release management. It's hard to know what that looks like. It has not been, like, outsourcing to the community has not worked. Like, I would be shocked, but possibly maybe there's an outsource shop that you could just do hourly that could cover everything, that just does that. And then you just need a manager, someone who's willing to deal with that. So there's so many variables, right?
It's almost like getting into the same conversation that we've had before, when we try to, definitely bona fide, give an ROI for a marketing effort. It's really hard to quantify the foundational aspects of engagement to deliver software and to support a community. And what do you do when you distribute those and decentralize those? The risks that you take are larger, because what if someone doesn't pick it up? So all these things have to be considered.
But I would also say that I think it is helpful, Pablo, like, as we asked for with Wayne, to say, what does that roadmap look like, right? Because it is, I mean, everything's a fit, right? Even if we do a performance enhancement to the chain, we call it a fit, but I call those core fits, right? Not a feature enhancement or something like that. That's not necessarily solving a critical problem. I don't know how to break those down in that way, but maybe there is a breakdown, because we've talked about doing things like enhancing, going up to Antelope. Is that on the roadmap or is it not? Like, maybe we could do some thinking about that, just to be more clear on what the possibilities are. Again, if a slew of bugs comes in, there's only a certain bandwidth, right? For releases. And releases are difficult. So yeah.
Pavo and I have talked about the roadmap a little bit, and that's one of the first things that I would want to focus on with Pavo once this worker proposal gets approved. Is it's a spike, and it's cement the roadmap and bring that probably to Pavo, and then Pavo is going to have to defend that up. So
hey Eric, can you you can probably find it faster than I can. Can you post a link in chat to the roadmap you have?
So I wanted to follow up on Luke's comments, which I agree with. I do think that if the decision of the steering committee is going to hypothetically be to proceed with a package of work proposals that say has a 20 or 25% reduction in spend, that it, in that scenario, it definitely behooves the steering committee to have all the worker proposals work on now as part of the worker proposal, what the additional at least 25% in cuts to get to 50% would be in 3 months, so that we do not have to spend the same level of time. We can't afford to have another 1 month delay in the process and all that sort of stuff when you're running out of funds. So, you know, if the steering committee is going to end up voting for a package that, you know, only cuts about 20-25%, I strongly believe not only is that not enough, but then in that scenario, you got to have the planning already done. So you can just say, yep, implement it. This is it. We've already decided, and it's very fast.
I don't think that's the one I was talking about.
Pavo, that's just the next month or two, and then the longer one is the enhancement.
Yeah, this one, that's the one I
That's
was
the
talking about,
future
yeah.
one.
So, so you can take a look at kind of, this is what Eric had put together, and it's kind of planned, so you can look at those things in here. You can see Antelope upgrade is kind of in the backlog, and you can see a few other things in there. And again, this is, you know, I have not been part of this. It's and you know, it'll require some time to figure out what that roadmap is, and it's probably iterative. I generally operate in a highly iterative environment rather than forecasting long-term you know, goals, because the environment we're in right now just changes so fast. That's it. It's better just to focus on kind of what do you think is the top priority that you need to be working on the next couple of months, rather than looking, you know, 6 months or a year out there. So to answer your question, my starting point is this roadmap for change specifically. And then for dashboard, that's basically this right here, right? So I'll post that in here as well, which is you can see in here what is currently in development, what's waiting, what's in design, what's in the backlog. So you can kind of look at that and see what is planned for the dashboard. And of course, you know, yeah, that would be part of my reporting. Oops, sorry. So yeah, I think to answer your question, David, to cut another 25%, like I said, I looked at this and I said, what do I feel comfortable with pitching as what I am comfortable taking on? The way I operate and kind of what I'm willing to work on is not necessarily what others might be willing to take on. So maybe a better approach from a steering committee standpoint is to start to identify who potentially could pitch a worker proposal that is significantly lower, kind of this lights on scenario, even before we decide on this. Adam, I heard you had a lot of concerns on the budget, and you've also mentioned at some point you might be interested in pitching a worker proposal. Maybe that's what you should do. Maybe you should put together a worker proposal that is kind of focusing on the chain part, right? And say, here's what I'm willing to do, and here's how much money I require as an alternative. Or maybe there needs to be an effort out there, like this could be a strategy, right? For example, what we could do is just basically go and try to proactively find a team out there that's cheaper, right? That is potentially willing to take those tasks on, right? So because we've never really done that as a steering committee, and I agree that there isn't really enough people out there, but maybe there is a quote unquote worker proposal for us to go and try to find people or teams or someone, right? To say, hey, and kind of handhold them and say, hey, we're kind of thinking of that, someone who's willing to operate the websites, the dashboard, or whatever. Would you be willing to take this on and kind of try to find people that are perhaps in other geographies that are cheaper, that maybe we'll be able to do it? Maybe that's the approach that the steering committee should take.
To me, this worker proposal is, lights on for core software development for the next, fiscal quarter. And the next step is the dormancy. But once again, this all Eric and I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to plan the 5 iterations. Eric's done a great job of presenting this. Here's what we can do now that'll be really effective. Here's the cost, here's the cliff, here's further. Always a spreadsheet with 10 options. Every time you do that, you're spending 100% of your time making sausage, and you're not being agile. You're not delivering software. You're planning. So asking people to plan the next 2 moves takes a lot of energy and commitment.
And I think because of our structure, right? We're not a centralized company where we have full-time employees. We are basically looking, it's not just a matter of, can I get a resource for X dollars to do whatever? It's somebody has to come to the table and actually say, hey, I will own this. I will actually be responsible for those KPIs. I will manage the team. I will make the decisions. I will do all of this work, right? So, so that's, to me, is the key. And we don't have a lot of those people, right? Where we don't have a lot of people that are willing to come and own a complete worker proposal from start to finish. So maybe the effort is to go and try to find them. I'm not sure how, but maybe it's worth trying. I don't know.
No, I pretty much agree with all that was said, and I won't submit like a competing proposal or anything with there. I do have some areas of concern, which I think can come down a little. I think I will submit a couple of small proposals, and there will be a little bit of overhead, but more specifically, I think I could probably get some of our hosting stuff down too. I have to go meet with someone about that, but that might also be a possibility. So it doesn't end here. I think, I don't 100% agree that it's completely lights on. I know we can go lower, and I think it could go lower and everyone would still be comfortable. But let me strategize on that a little bit. I think we can work together and get this down a little bit.
That would be great. Pablo, so I guess a question for you with what you just sort of talked through. I mean, am I hearing that if, 3 months out, if this worker proposal or some variation on it is approved, that in 3 months out, if it turns out, per comments by others on this call, that there's additional cuts needed to be made, right? You've been pitching, let's continue on and evaluate every 3 months. Are you saying that in that scenario, you and your worker proposal are going to say, we're not willing to cut anything, that this is it? I mean, we're done. Is that what's going to happen?
No, that's not what I mean at all. I guess what I'm referring to specifically is the chain portion of this, right? So I'm not going to talk about the other worker proposals, because I think those could be reduced to a more, lights on scale, on the lights on scale. But on chain specifically, what I'm saying is that if I am going to take on the chain, that part that is chain out of this, which is, or I don't know, where we just did the math, 40 something thousand, is the least that I'm comfortable pitching. So if 3 months from now we say, hey, let's reduce the chain further, I would probably say, hey, let's find somebody else who can do it for cheaper, because I don't want to do it for cheaper. I think chain is a lot of work, a lot of risk, a lot of responsibility that, I just don't, I want to have the best possible people around me, which are very expensive, right? And that's the only way I feel comfortable doing it. So therefore, I would not, come and propose something different. But that doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't come and propose something different, right?
Yeah. So so I mean, that's not far off from what I think I said. I mean, you're saying that if we needed to cut back, well, you're going to be open to cuts in other worker proposals, that at least with the core chain part of this, there's not cuts. And I'm not clear on the.
Well, just so we're clear, when I say core chain, that's not everything in here, right? I can still put together, like, let's say that Adam is willing to put together a worker proposal for core chain, which is basically, if you look at this table here, these two things, core chain and core services, probably, right? Those two things. I can certainly take this out of my worker proposal, out of this, and I'll be very happy to just pitch a worker proposal that's going to focus on, you know, the website, the dashboard, and maybe even, you know, the DAO stack, whatever. So that's what I consider core, not this whole thing, right? So if I was to take this out, I'd probably reduce my pay by 2,000. I would take out architect, which is 7, that's 19,000, release manager 8.5. That's you know, 18, what was it, 19, 27.5. And probably, you know, hosting outsource, this will come back down as well, right? Those costs. And if somebody else is willing to say, hey, I'll take all those buckets and do it for half or whatever, then that's kind of what I would propose. Me personally, I would not propose a core chain, taking on core chain for less than is in here. Now, I could potentially propose, for example, if I just put together a worker proposal that has the dashboard by itself, let's say, for example, that would be significantly cheaper, right? Or any other areas. I'm just talking about the chain specifically.
And
I
one of
have,
the things that I've been trying to put together with in my mind, and might be coming to, you know, with Pavlo's worker proposal, bring it forward, is, you know, what are the roles, responsibilities, duties, and interactions performed by a given paycheck? And Eric's number is in the tens. My number is somewhere around 8 to 10. Project management, staffing management, technical analysis, so many very valuable activities, roles, responsibilities, duties, and interactions that are performed. And I am always open to further conversations regarding scoping back the number of roles that I undertake on the project, firmly identifying the boundaries of my functionality with respect, rather than a startup mentality where literally, you know, we've been there for, you know, half a decade, basically, you know, scrapping and working and being 24/7, 365 on call. And it's going to continue. And that commitment should be incentivized somehow. The commitment is a good thing.
Hey,
Adam, you
so-
had your hand up.
Yeah, I just got one request. So, do we have a breakdown of the hosting stuff? Like what basically the 7,500, like what we pay for subscription fees and just the whole inventory of everything?
Well, so this is basically 3 buckets. It's the AWS bill, and there's a lot of small little services. I don't have a breakdown, but I'm sure Eric does, since he's been working at saving some money there. There's also payment to Blocks, which is currently $1,000, and cost of Grafana, which I think is $1,250 or something. So
Okay, so
there's
all
kind of
the
like
stuff that-
three components in the hosting. But honestly, Adam, I think, again, I would actually encourage you to submit a worker proposal for core chain. I think that would be a good thing for the steering committee to have as an alternative. If you believe you can do it significantly cheaper, then do it. But you have to take on all of this stuff, right? It's just because, again, in our model, there has to be a lead, and the lead is responsible for the overall outcome. So, for example, I could say, well, if I actually go on Upwork and find a principal software architect in India, I can probably hire them for $2,000, right? And there you go, $15,000 savings right here. But I am not willing to do that, right? Because I know what are the risks associated with that. Therefore, I am not going to pitch that, although somebody else can if they want to. And if the steering committee approves, then that becomes a valid solution, right? So I look at this from the standpoint of ownership. That's what I need. I need to have people that are, you know, extremely qualified to do this with me in order for me to feel good about doing it. And if I can't hire these people, then I don't want to do it, right? Is basically what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I understood. And I take, you know, I'm taking overhead into account too, you know, doing another core chain proposal to feel a little more overhead than I was expecting, right? So I'll have to think about it a little bit. Honestly, I think there's room to strategize a little bit more. I don't think maybe it doesn't even have to all go under one proposal, right? It's just my thinking. I just don't know yet. I'll have to dissect it a little bit more, but I think these are all good things.
All right, are there other questions, comments, maybe from the community?
Well, just one more thing, Pablo. I
Yeah.
never got to the nitty-gritty. So SDK, was that on a list somewhere? Like
Yes.
your team's still building that, but not supporting it with integrators. Is that correct? I just wanted to know the delineation there.
Yes, the SDK part is here somewhere. Yeah, right here, development QA and release management of SDKs.
Yeah.
And that's where I will be tapping into, I know you kind of have a separate budget for SDK development with LF1, but I'm basically rolling it under that same number, right? So that's why I was saying, hey, you know, it'll probably, because this team will have to do other stuff than just dashboard. This currently, the outsourced development is $21,000, and it's exclusively dashboard. And I'm reducing it to 20, and all of which is not a lot, but also extending the responsibilities to cover other stuff, right? So you might have some months where, I don't know, it's half the time they are spending on SDK, for example, right? Or on other projects. So yes, it is covered, I guess is the short answer.
No worries. That makes sense. And then, yeah, it's kind of implied that you have DevOps and hosting kind of under your proposal as well. But, you know, there's some management that has to go on there, but that makes sense. Okay. That's all.
All right, what else? Questions, comments from anyone? So is there anything specific? I guess this would be a question for the steering committee. Is there anything specific that the steering committee members want to see from me? I think the roadmap was mentioned, which I will definitely add into this spreadsheet. But other than, I mean, into this presentation, but other than that, is there anything else that the steering committee would want from me in order to, you know, be able to vote on this worker proposal?
I think just, maybe that's included in what you talked about as far as the roadmap, something related to, I mean, I think there's a little disconnect between what I heard from Ed saying this kind of is a lights on, and what David was trying to get clarity on, and what you're saying that there is still going to be innovation. So I think it'd be helpful to see a version of a lights on, and I know you said you're not really interested in that, but I guess that's just a challenge for me. I mean, I guess put your steering committee hat on yourself, Pablo, and say, am I cool with $1.2 million spent over the next 12 months for what? Like, what am I gonna, how is the project gonna be in a better place financially because we did that? So maybe that, as Ed was talking about, relates to risks, or maybe there's just some other way to frame this. Cause I'm trying to think, if I was sitting down having coffee with my friends in the space, and I say, yeah, we just spent $1.2 million to maintain infrastructure, they're gonna be like, wow, it's a lot of money. What'd you guys, like, what'd you do with that? What'd you get for it? What was the outcome? And I'm like, well, we have less runway now. It's like, well, okay, but so I'm still trying to understand, what would the chain and the project look like if we didn't do this, you know, and maybe that would be a way to sell your proposal a little better back to the risk mitigation concerns, because it's just a lot of money, and I'm looking for stuff that impacts revenue, and I'm still trying to see how this does that.
Well, but the problem is that it doesn't matter what I put together, because if I'm not the one who's willing to take this on, it's meaningless, right? Because at the end of the day, it's people or company that you are going to hire and trust them that they do their job, and you don't know which one you're going to hire. Am I going to be hiring people in India, or am I going to be hiring Ed to do the work, right? So there is also the quality component of this. That's why I don't think it is a exercise that needs to be done in a vacuum, where it's like, hey, here is an example. Maybe Eric, you can do it, because I know you kind of had those types of models in the past. But from my standpoint, that's meaningless, because if I'm saying I'm not going to do it, and there's nobody else around the table that's saying I'm going to do it, then what does that really mean? That in theory it could be done for $30,000, but nobody's out there willing to do it. That's why I think a better approach is, if we believe that this is a too expensive model, then I think that the steering committee should fund the process of recruiting cheaper resources that would be willing to step up and kind of take ownership of those tasks, right? And try to find a company and kind of handhold them, saying, hey, here's the opportunity, here's how it works. You kind of have to own everything, and there's this worker proposal, and let's talk about what it involves, and let's see if you're interested, right? And then if they are, then we'll eventually lead to them submitting a specific worker proposal that is now meaningful, right? Because it has a number, and somebody saying, I will do it for that number.
And some
Yeah,
of this
I agree.
comes,
I think that's a good answer. I mean, again, I'm trying to frame this in terms of you're being a steering committee member and somebody brings you a proposal that you're like, wow, this feels like I'm being trapped, meaning I have to either approve it or it doesn't get done, and I have to go put in the effort to find someone else to do it. I think that's kind of what I'm thinking along those lines of, this seems expensive. We're hearing from the community and others to say it doesn't feel like the level of cuts that we're all trying to do collectively together, again, from the Game Theory dynamic. And so as a steering committee member, I hope you have that. I hope you're hearing that and you're including that into what you're doing. For example, one way to pitch this might be, I've put in a little bit of effort to look for other options. And even if you're not willing to do them as a steering committee member, you might be interested in saying, hey, here's some opportunities. Does anyone else want to run with this, such as Adam or somebody else, to kind of hopefully lower the cost of it, to say, I recognize that this is a big spend, which is basically, I'm way you presented this, I'm seeing it a lot as a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a cost center. It's not necessarily going to generate revenue. I mean, obviously the dashboard has to work for us to bring traffic to it, but the idea that we're spending this much on just keeping things going and much less on bringing in new eyeballs, and we're asking the group that's bringing in new eyeballs to spend even less, I'm just having trouble justifying that. Just mathematically, it's just difficult for me to comprehend. But again, if you're saying, well, take it or leave it, you don't have another choice unless you want to do the work to find someone else to do it. I mean, maybe that's the reality we're in, but I can understand why that's discouraging to hear.
Right, but there's also different areas of this, right? So we've been kind of talking a lot about the chain itself, which represents a big chunk of this, right? But it comes to me personally, and I'm all supportive of this, by the way. I don't really want, it's not like doing the chain is my favorite thing in the world. It's not. It's if there is somebody, I wish Eric wasn't leaving and he would take this on, but or keep it on, I guess. But that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Is I look at this and say, I know there is not a lot of people willing to take this on. Let me think through what it means for me to take this on, and that's basically the result of it. But I would absolutely, if there's somebody else out there that we believe can do a good job at a lower cost, I'll be totally supportive of that. I don't mind. I can scale all of this down, and I can submit a $25,000 worker proposal to run, the dashboard. And I'd be totally happy with that. I don't need to run any of the other things, right? Or whatever the cost is. So I'm fairly flexible in terms of my involvement. The only kind of guideline I have is that I don't want to scale myself down to halftime, because that's kind of not what I enjoy doing. I want to typically commit 100% of my time to a project. So if there isn't enough time for me to work full time, that's totally fine too. I will go and find something else to do.
I'm like Pavel on this, where I am willing to consider a lot of options, but I think one of the things that has always made Eric and I a little bit confused during our discussions of budget is, maybe we can clarify the value structure. There are categories of cost centers. There's marketing, and there is core software development, core architecture, core infrastructure. If you don't value core infrastructure, core software development at a high enough level that all this feels wrong, it feels shameful, it feels so many of these words that I'm hearing, then shut it the heck off. Don't fund it. And live in that world of risk. That's not the conversation we're having.
Or find somebody else. I'm not as
finding somebody else. I agree. My words, I stumble over the words a lot of the time, so forgive me. But it's literally, you're just trading off one risk for another. And if we want to have unproductive conversation, that it's like trying to prove the value of a core software development team is not the discussion I want to be having every day. I would love to have it be, we value these activities, these roles, responsibilities, duties, and actions. We value them. They are part of our core culture, and we value them, and we will incentivize them appropriately. And that is part of who we are. And let's get that clarified. You know?
And I would love to be able to provide that for you, but I don't think we're in an environment where we can do that. Like, it's not like we have an unlimited resource of funds to pull from to stick to those values, or we
So
have.
therefore, I think
So,
maybe
if I could, Ed, I just want to complete my thought, please.
yeah, sorry.
It's that we are in a constantly changing environment where in the past we did have funds and we did have those values. And I think we built the team, David and Pablo built the team accordingly. And we're in a different environment now where we're saying, okay, if we just keep doing that, we're eventually going to run out of money, and it doesn't matter what we value, we're not going to function anymore, right? So I appreciate what you voiced that you would prefer, but I'm also saying, like, I do think we have to have these conversations, and hopefully as much as possible, not involve our own like identity, egoic attachments to what we expect, because it is going to be difficult to hear, oh, the values changed and what I do is no longer valued. Like, that's a real thing that can happen.
I agree.
In the environment of the situation. And the more we're comfortable having those conversations, the more we're going to have a really great environment to work in, even through difficult conversations.
I agree with all of that. And for me, I get very action oriented. And if we want to cut this budget by another 50%, I think it would be useful to do a risk analysis, have that conversation. And if we are going to basically decentralize many of the functions of the core software team as we knew it before, that is a viable option. It is a wonderful option. It's an exciting option.
But Ed, I'm not sure who is going to do it. That's the point I keep.
This is where
keep
it gets
coming
hard.
back to it. It's not like here's a list of like, if we cut it in half, then here's the risk. It's like, I don't know what the risks are because I don't know who's doing the job, right? So so that's why I don't think that part is productive. What I think I'm willing to do, which is, you know, not a lot of work, is I can basically go through this and pull out the chain piece and say, here's what it includes, here's what it excludes, and here is the current worker proposal, which is my piece, right? And just post it out there to the community and say, hey, is anybody, here's the current worker proposal, it's X dollars for these responsibilities. Is anybody interested in potentially submitting a worker proposal to take this on for less, right? And that's a very easy thing to do for sure. And then Adam, if you are interested in submitting a bid for that, then that would be a perfect you know, opportunity, or anybody else out there. Now, if there are no takers, then obviously the tougher next step would be, you know, you now need to kind of actively go and recruit, but that obviously takes a lot of time. Eric, do you spend a lot of time kind of modeling this? What is your perspective on kind of like what we could do to lower the cost of the core chain maintenance? I think that's part of, I'm hearing that's the focus. I don't know if the other areas are potentially a focus as well. We can talk about it, but what do you think would be the best next step if we're like, hey, this is too much, but there isn't really an alternative? How do we get to an alternative?
No, I mean, I think that that is hard to know. I do think, like, putting out like what you're saying is an RFP. I think what you've done really well is we've defined what does core chain mean. I think everyone on the steering committee could go through that list and just say, do we need to be doing this just to even, you know, support this, the basic maintenance and upkeep of the chain? I think that list is actually really hard to cut. So I think we do have that list of what needs to be provided versus what isn't. And so I think you did a great job there. Let's put it on an RFP. We could send it out to some outsource shops. Let's just see what people, you know, they know what they need to do for project management, QA, release, all this, you know, getting up to speed, learning a chain, C++, you know, supporting releases of SDKs. Let's see what they say, you know, maybe that is a good exercise, or maybe we'll get back like crickets. I don't know. But maybe that would help understand that. And again, this is for the core chain piece, which you outlined is about 30K, right? So it's a third of it.
I think it's more than that, because I'd probably have like the services, the hosting, the DevOps. I think part of this as well. It just doesn't make sense, you know, yeah, because a lot of those services are kind of chain related, or they're dev environments, right? And and you kind of need to coordinate the release. So I think those are kind of bundled. I'm not interested in like taking DevOps and hosting while somebody
Yeah,
else is doing it.
what about like striking fixed costs? I'm gonna talk a lot like I talked to you, Eric. So it's like a little informal. So I apologize. But what if we just struck all the fixed costs, strike all the AWS serving? That means we don't have a DevNet anymore because we can't afford it. We're gonna downscale roles and responsibilities.
We can't. I mean, look at those services. You want to kill the Explorer? No. You want to kill the staking APR service? Maybe, but you'll sell $100. You want to kill the staking calculator? Sure, that's $10. Circulating supply service, that's not a lot. Auto bundle service, that's required by our Opera agreement, but I guess you could kill that. Grafana side, it's $12.50. Do we want to kill Grafana? Sure, we can save $1,250. Registration side, I don't think we can kill that because that's where bulk of our registrations happen. All the wrap services, we don't want to kill that, right? And then it also includes hosting the dashboard and the website. You don't want to kill that, right? So it's yeah.
I actually did have a question related to that. I didn't see much data on the actual hardware we use to host DevNet and TestNet.
Yeah, let's take that offline, Adam. You can talk to Eric. He has all that information. I don't think we should be discussing it here.
Yeah, sure. And then that and what you've included here, I think more than actually shutting it down, I think actually migrating somewhere it's got significantly less cost overhead might be a good strategy, but I do think it is worth investigating a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to remind us too that we did that once, right? We went off and put it over on what was the Microsoft Azure or whatever, and then we had to move it back. Was that right? Or am I missing?
Yeah, that was terrible.
Yeah, that was a terrible experience. That was my recollection of it as well. So some of these things are easy to say up front, like, hey, we can save this money, but I think
I was a migration professional for over a decade. I think I might be able to scope that appropriately, but I think we need to have
and Adam, that wasn't an attack at you. I'm just saying in general, I just want to make sure the steering committee knows that some of these things we have tried, and even Eric's efforts to find new devs. I know he put a lot of time into interviews and stuff. So I just want to remind people that that this is the other side of the coin. Is there is very serious risk to trying to just do something we knew that doesn't might sound good up front, but then sometimes
I understand all of that completely, guys. Thank you.
And so I guess the next step here, if I'm hearing correctly, would be to let's try to peel off the core chain pieces with the hosting and the services. I think those have to come together into potentially, let's see if somebody's interested, but just take it out. And then maybe what I'll do is submit a alternative worker proposal that covers everything other than the core chain, which probably be just the website and dashboard. And I guess it probably has to cover some of the DAO pieces, unless we feel the DAO pieces we cannot do, right? So
how does your scrappy world of startup go when you lose internal technology resources officially? Like me and Mike gone, so you've got your chief tinkerers gone. You've got Adam in the community who can step in. Ed in the community can step in for a given rate. How does that work? Like, what does it look like?
Well, that's actually, I think that's what I was asking about. That's exactly what I'm asking about. It's like, what is a lights on thing? And this, I think, is what David was asking. What have we been, getting for this work, and I'd like to even take that further and say, and how does that impact revenue? And these are the type of decisions that if we don't start making them now, we will be forced to make them later. That's all.
Yeah, so maybe actually, now I think about it, because you're right, Ed, and you and I had this conversation. I was thinking about it. If let's say we take the approach, let's just be dramatic and say we're just going to cut core chain altogether. Like there's not going to be any core chain at all, right? That there'll be just no releases, no bug. If there is any bug, then hopefully the community will pick it up. Well, let's take that approach, right? The question is, like that I've asked myself, is like, okay, if that's the case, where we basically come to a point where nobody's responsible for the chain, should we still be investing money into running the dashboard at this rate, and I don't know. I would be very afraid to be responsible for a dashboard project where there is nobody on the chain side, or somebody on the chain side that's not adequate. So that's maybe a better approach, actually. Now that I
And
think
there
about
are,
it, hold on a minute.
go ahead,
Maybe a
yeah.
better approach, now I think about it, is maybe we should take this entire, because if we believe we kind of want to have some version of all of those pieces out there, right? We want to have some core chain support. We want to run some core services. We want to run dashboard to some extent. We want to have the website and some infrastructure for the DAO. I think maybe if the answer to that is yes, then maybe we should just float out this entire worker proposal to the community and say, and I'd be totally fine with that. It's like, hey, community, here's a worker proposal for core stuff. Is somebody interested in bidding on that?
And how long do you open that for an RFP? One of the things that Eric and I, once again, this is offline discussions. I apologize, Eric, for bringing in some of our talks, but one of the things that we've talked about is when it comes to BP knowledge at a technical level, to actually master all the technical details and risks of a deployment of FIO, block producers, with Atom as the only exception so far, are not acknowledging that they can do that. So we don't have a BP community that can be deeply technical, in my opinion. And when we desire the traction from a community level, it has been very difficult, if not impossible, to gain traction at a community level in the way that's being proposed. And that's past experience for the past 5 years through the hot of the market and the cold of the market. So
Okay,
it's really a difficult thing.
Ed, let's bring it back, because
Thank you.
we're running out of time and David needs to leave. And since this is my worker proposal and I have to recuse myself as a steering committee member from many decisions, I would like to hear from the steering committee members as to what do you guys think should be the next step here.
I mean, I'd like to hear from David and Eric, but I don't know that we have a lot of options, really. I mean,
I think some of the next steps have been described. You mentioned, including a roadmap.
Yeah, I'll do that for sure. Mhm.
So that's one next step. I think, you mentioned at least, okay, what might it look like if core chain was taken out. So at least that, is out there and available. It sounds like you're not willing, and I was going to ask the same thing of Wayne, to say, okay, if you have to cut again in 3 months, what would that look like? Sounds like you're not willing to do that, because that is something I would like to understand so that it's thought through in advance. And then I think exploring other ways to reduce cost. Adam mentioned some things and some discussions that sounds like he's going to have with you and others there. I think that would be very helpful. And you also mentioned that while you didn't separate between FIO and non-FIO, I think that is important to understand, because while shifting from one to another does not affect the overall runway, it does affect the non-FIO runway, which is the shorter runway, and does create a sales situation for the foundation. So I do think it's important to understand how much of this compensation would be able to go in FIO that presumptively would not, where the recipient is not planning to liquidate it right away, because that doesn't necessarily achieve anything, right? That I think needs to be known, right? So we can understand the impact on the runway.
And also, so float this worker proposal to the community, see if there's any takers. Is that a next step as well?
Well, there's no harm in that. I mean, I think that's sort of been done, but I mean, I don't think there's any harm in that ever with any worker proposal. We should be encouraging folks.
Okay, Eric, Luke, do you guys have any other next steps?
No, I think that's a good list. And already a lot of thoughts been put into it. If we really want to think about what it takes to cut this way down, again, I think we have a number in mind that people seem to want a 50% cut. What does that look like? Is that possible? What do you lose? I don't know. Like, that's not easy. There's a lot of sausage making, as Ed said, but we can take a cut at that and RFP it out. We'll just see if we got any takers.
Yeah, I mean, related to that, I think would be maybe add a little bit more risk assessment. That's, I think, a lot of the value that you're bringing with all this work. And so just an explanation of, as a steering committee member yourself, why you think this is important to not let drop, why you decided to pick this up and say, okay, here are the real risks that we face as a project if nobody does this, and this is why I think it needs to get done. And this is why I'm proposing that I get paid well to do it so that I'm incentivized to do it because no one else is stepping up to do it. I think that would be helpful to kind of put some of this stuff in, because you've kind of done that already internally, like you decided things you're going to exclude, for example. So maybe a little more visibility on the risk side of the decision process you made might be helpful for us to realize, like, okay, there may be reasons why people feel uncomfortable about spending this much money, myself included, but here are the real risks if we don't do it, Does that make sense?
Yep.
Well, so risks is like if we don't do core chain or don't operate those services or don't operate the dashboard, don't operate the website, don't operate the DAO, that kind of risk.
I mean, in a sense, when we talk about like operating the DAO, there's certain things that are in place now that will continue to be in place at some level until something breaks, right? Or,
Let's just
that's
say
kind of
certain
where,
features don't work. There's risks, right? Certain features don't work. You can't wrap for 3 weeks. You can't, you get a bug, the chain's down for a week. There's risks like that we can detail that are just basic software risks that you need to deal with. You can't get a release out the door. You can't get a bug fix out, things like that. And maybe as a group, I agree, we decide those are risks we're willing to take,
And that relates to what David asked for, is like a backward looking history of how much we've needed to do that kind of stuff. Because that gives some credence to the importance of this stuff, saying, look, in the past, all this time has had to be spent to keep this going, that going, this going, that going. When this thing breaks, we have to jump in and fix it, in this situation, that situation. Because I think ultimately what we're all responsible for fiscally is we don't want to have a payment going out where like we're paying a bunch of money just so someone's available. Because it's like, well, okay, but why would we do that unless they're busy doing super important stuff that's going to eventually help us become sustainable? That's the way I'm trying to look at things.
Okay, Eric, I'll look for your help on that, on the chain side.
Sure.
And also too, I just want to reiterate, Pablo, I appreciate that you're going through all this. I know you're like you said, you're picking up stuff because you feel it has to be done. And I really appreciate that. And I'd love to see 5 other people submitting similar proposals, but that's not where we live right now. So thank you for your efforts. I appreciate it.
Cool. Anything else before we wrap up? Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Finishing right on time.
Thanks, Bubba.